division and horror. We know where this leads because we've seen it. We saw it on the 15th of March in New Zealand. He must be suspended. He does not deserve, he is not fit, he's not fit, he is not us.
The first bit I'm going to bring you is about Anning and Egg Boy and the young man who's just handed himself in for kicking. And he didn't really kick him. Well, he did, but anyway, I'll let you judge for yourself. I actually think the egg to the back of the hand had as much force as the foot that this guy copped in the butt.
Of assaulting the teenager dubbed Egg Boy has been released. Live to Neri Tai for the details. Now, Neri, why do police want to speak to him?
Well, Pete, this young man is accused of assaulting Egg Boy, and although this incident took place close to a month ago, they're still trying to track him down, and today they released a clear image of him. It was on March 16 when 17-year-old Will Connolly smashed an egg over the head of Fraser Anning. As a result, the Queensland Senator struck back. The teenager was then placed into a headlock and then thrown and tackled to the ground. During that whole scuffle, you can see a young man wearing a black T-shirt and shorts kick Egg Boy while he's on the ground. He then walks around casually filming the whole incident, and then he kicks Egg Boy yet again. Detectives want to speak to this young man. He could face assault charges. I've been told that investigators have also interviewed the senator and also the 17-year-old boy from Hampton, but at this stage no charges have been laid. Police say the investigation...
I don't know why they cut it off so quick there. I actually think, and I have to go back and look at all the different footage that's available, but I don't think that last one actually connected at all.
remains ongoing, Pete.
Not that I condone kicking people when they're on the ground, but I do think this has been blown up significantly, especially as there has been almost no condemnation of the actions of the guy who smacked the senator in the back of the head. But I did a slow motion of both the egg smacking and of the young guy kicking Egg Boy, so people can decide for themselves.
See a young man wearing a black...
I didn't have the mic on. I did this so people can decide for themselves if they think that the young man deserves to be charged when Egg Boy's having no punishment.
Black Egg Boy while he's on... Egg Boy while he's on... As a result, the Queensland Senate... and then thrown it, and then thrown it, and then thrown it, and then thrown it, and then yet again. Detectives want to speak yet again. Detectives want to speak yet again. Detectives want to speak. Told that investigators have also interviewed the senator and also the 17-year-old boy. Told that investigators have also interviewed the senator and also the 17-year-old boy.
The senator did get his own back, though. Coming up next, I thought I'd remind you of what the senator has actually said in his own words and his statements that he was censored for.
Your initial statement outside of, right after the New Zealand shooting, and some of it is very rational, and some of it everybody can agree with, such as the first sentence. The first sentence, which was, "I'm utterly opposed to any form of violence within our community, and I totally condemn the actions of the gunman." But nobody covered that. Why do you think that is?
Well, I guess, Carl, because we've got a very left-wing media here, and if you don't agree with their stance, then they'll make up all sorts of stories and twist what you say, and you'll end up with the stories that they've put out.
Yeah, and you know what I found, which was what they did was they took some of your third and fourth and fifth paragraphs within that statement, and that was the headline that ran. And I'll read some of them here. I'm sure you know. You said the real cause of the bloodshed on New Zealand streets today is the immigration program, which allowed Muslim fanatics to migrate to New Zealand in the first place. Let us be clear: while Muslims have been the victim today, usually they are the perpetrators. Worldwide, Muslims are killing people in the name of their faith on an industrial scale. Do you think it was too soon for that?
Oh no, I just stated a fact, and and I'll continue to state that fact. I think they're the greatest threat. Muslim immigration is the greatest threat to our Western way of Judeo-Christian way of life.
Do you condemn white supremacy? I do.
I've never advocated for white supremacy. I am a nationalist. I believe that Australia should be for Australians, and for Australian jobs, and for some reason, it's only the Western nations that have done something that apparently need diversity. And I'm a bit shocked about that. But apparently, we've got to bring in all these people who do not want to fit in with our way of life, and that attack us on a daily basis in our streets.
Yeah. So, if it was up to you, would you stop all Muslim immigration into Australia and New Zealand area?
Well, I can't speak for New Zealand, but absolutely into Australia, yes, I would. They've done nothing for us that I can see, apart from make us build barricades in our streets so that they don't run over us as much, and all we're doing is getting attacked by them. A lot of the refugees stay on our welfare program. They're seeking refuge, and they're crossing 8 or 10 countries to get here, and then they get onto our welfare system, and that costs us, the taxpayers, a lot of money.
Yeah, but could you understand how what you're saying right now rattles people's cages, on the sense that it's just, it's not politically correct, which I've never really cared much for political correctness, but at the same time, you don't think there's a small number of people that are just very, very loud that should not be allowed to immigrate to Australia, or do you think that it's just all Muslims, period?
Well, Carl, every country that's tried this same experiment, like England and France and Germany and Sweden, they're finding out now that the experiment hasn't been much of a success. There's white flight out of those countries. They're leaving. A lot of the people just they're scared to be in their own country. If we continue down this road and we think we're going to get a different outcome, then I think we're deluded. The same thing's going to happen. There's been 52 countries around the world that were Christian, Buddhist, or a Hindu that are now Muslim states, and the only thing that's happening to the Christians, the Buddhists, and the Hindus is they're being slaughtered. So I don't want this for Australia. I can tell you now, there is a lot of people in this country who agree with me, and they don't want the same thing to happen here as is happening in Europe, for instance.
All right, now, actually quite a few people watched the censure already, the whole thing, so what I've done is I've cut it down a bit. What's it doing? Stop, don't play. Okay. Yep, we're ready. All right, so I've cut it down so that we've only got 4 speeches at the end. Senator Bernardi, who didn't vote for all of the censure, only part of it, and he actually had some really good points to make about the politics of the left. Duncan Spender, who, even though he voted for the censure and tried to pander to the left, came out and said, sorry, but you're wrong, there are people that think like Senator Anning in Australia, so this has to be part of the debate. The statement for Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party was actually also really good, so I've put that in there as well. I think that's really worth having a listen to. And I left one 2-minute lefty. Who did I leave in there? I can't remember who I left in there now. But it was only a 2-minute speech, which pretty much summarises everything that the left had to say themselves. So Senator Anning sat through you'll see the look on his face in some of it. He almost laughed at some of it, but he was quite serious through it all, of course, while they all spouted the same things pretty much over and over again. So let's have a taste of that. I hope you like my editing.
And feed hate, division and horror. We know where this leads because we've seen it. We saw it on the 15th of March in New Zealand. He must be suspended. He does not deserve, he is not fit, he's not fit, he is not us.
Well, Mr President, I must say I would have appreciated the courtesy of you letting me know that you were intending to make such a statement, and had you have offered me that courtesy, I would have pointed out to you that the motion that will be circulated in this chamber shortly relating to a suspension of Senator Anning relates very directly to comments he made in this chamber as a senator.
I appreciate that, Senator Di Natale. I was trying to frame the matters coming before the Senate because I appreciate that they have been conflated in public debate by commentators and others outside the chamber as well.
Firstly, that Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion. This right includes freedom, either alone or in community with others and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship and observance. Mr President, today the government and government senators join with the opposition and members of other parties to condemn in the strongest possible terms the comments made by Senator Anning, condemn actions and comments designed to incite fear and distrust. That the Senate censures Senator Anning for his inflammatory and divisive comments and to vilify in its condemnation of these appalling comments that have been made. These comments were appalling, ugly and divisive. They were dangerous and unacceptable from anyone, inflammatory and divisive. And we do not tolerate that sort of divisive, inflammatory commentary to incite hatred, seeks to vilify people. It is absolutely right to censure Senator Anning and anyone else, and ultimately to condemn anyone else within our community who seeks to use a horrific tragedy like this one as an opportunity to vilify and divide people based on their religious belief.
Racism and religious intolerance, to peace over violence, innocence over evil, understanding over extremism, liberty over fear and love over hate. A collective commitment to stand against hatred. Loss of life in Christchurch is where hatred leads us. So if we are to end the cycle of extremism, to end the cycle of hatred that underpins it, all leaders, political, community and religious, must stand united against hatred and extremist ideology. Extraordinarily offensive and divisive statement. Blame extremist right-wing terrorists to fan the flames of division. How pathetic, how shameful. Shameful and pathetic to get attention by exploiting diversity as a fault line for political advantage. He does not speak for this Senate, he does not speak for this nation, and he does not represent Australian values. It's a divisive statement and the extremist ideology that either motivates it or which he simply wishes to fan. Hatred, hate speech, intolerance and hate, and in doing so undermine our democratic values. There is a difference between freedom of speech and hate speech. Dehumanising, prejudice. It is why we say legislative protections in hate speech are so important. And I say hate speech cannot be defended on grounds of freedom of speech because it is an attack on our democracy, because it inflicts real and direct harm. Hate speech? Well, I say this is not about the contest of ideas, it's about democratic principles. Hate speech, racism, prejudice, discrimination and hate speech. Even John Howard putting one nation last, racism and hatred. White Australia policy, the ideology and the hate speech that we have seen in recent times. The senator who is being censured in his first speech argued for a return to the White Australia policy. He used a term associated with the Holocaust. Many coalition senators lined up and shook your hand, and I suspect many of them regret so now. I think it was disappointing to see the motion, it's okay to be white. Government ministers being prepared to fan prejudice for political purposes. This is also about how you frame the debate. Tolerance and hatred, they're actually harming our democracy and hatred, hate speech. If we do this, this makes our nation stronger at home and in the world.
In standing against the hateful words, a pathetic man lacking any empathy. Hate speech in our society, the rise in hate speech. Hate speech has real consequences, not just the consequences that we saw play out in the most horrific way in Christchurch. It has real consequences when Jews go to the synagogue and they are forced to undergo increased security screening because they don't feel safe in their own places of worship. Hate speech, pathetic hate speech, risks giving them the attention they so desperately crave. And to do everything we can to deny them that platform, to deny them the opportunity for their voices to be amplified. I don't accept that it's enough simply to censure one person and accept that we have fulfilled our responsibilities in standing against hate speech. When he invoked the final solution, we saw some members of the government offering hugs and handshakes on the back of that speech. Hate speech. The voices of hate. Hate speech will have no place in a civilised society. Hate speech laws call out that hate speech, stamp out the rise of fascism, this neo-Nazi movement that's growing right across the world, to use every single ounce of power that we have to deny these people a platform. The horrific language that has taken primacy in our national debate for far too long.
Early in Senator Anning's unexpected and I hope short Senate sojourn, I said, and I quote here in this chamber, "I'm starting to think that Senator Anning lies awake at night trying to think up new ways and words to offend decent, rational, compassionate Australians." To me, it was straight out of the NRA handbook on how gun extremists can benefit from little kids being murdered. These grotesque comments. That is not freedom of speech. That is irresponsible, reckless and totally dangerous behaviour. That's what the NRA was telling One Nation, telling Pauline Hanson's people. This is what you do. If there's a massacre, you turn it to your advantage. That's what the NRA was saying. That's what One Nation was trying to bring into Australia. So all I can say, Senator Anning, and I say it quite deliberately, you besmirch this place. You should be ashamed of yourself, and I hope you're soon gone.
Okay. So, Senator Anning, I'll do you the courtesy of offering you the opportunity to speak now or at the conclusion of debate before it's put, given you're the subject of the censure. Would you prefer to speak now or later?
At the end of debate will be fine.
I'll grant you that courtesy.
Our First Nations peoples have carried the consequences of murderous prejudice throughout our entwined history. Hateful prejudice, fanned by the illusion of superiority, to be victims against superior weaponry, hatred of minorities, misplaced power and bullying superiority, viewed by cowards with power and guns as less worthy of humanity, with boastful pride and emboldened by the rightness of whiteness. The carbines were talking English, and the mass murderer rejected the richness of diversity, driven by religious hatred and xenophobia, empowered by military-style weapons. We reject the scourges of racism, of bigotry, and the kind of hateful, violent, murderous prejudice we saw in Christchurch. It arises from the fueling of hatred, irresponsible language, and the demonising of people of colour and difference. It's neither fair nor honourable. The Senator said in his tweet, "The real cause of bloodshed on New Zealand streets today is the immigration program which allowed Muslim fanatics to migrate to New Zealand in the first place. The real cause of the bloodshed in Christchurch, the real cause was prejudice, hate, and a passion for violent action, aided and abetted by the availability of a military-style weapon. Immoral has aligned himself with the most vicious form of ethnic and racial hatred. We cannot allow his hateful values to go unchallenged. The stench of racism and hate linger in this chamber. We turn our backs against xenophobia, against hate crimes, exploit fear and ignorance, who argue that it's all right to be white. And your language does matter. I say to those faithful mourning for their families in Christchurch, Allah Yarhamhum."
Yesterday, I tabled a petition signed by 1.4 million people, the biggest online petition in Australia's history. To remove Senator Anning from Parliament because of his despicable comments. Because if there is one politician that trades in hate, fear and division, it is Senator Anning. They are being apologists for hate speech. Senator Bernardi does not seem to have any understanding of the difference between hate
And where voters are barking up the wrong tree, the answer is facts, not to indulge their ignorance. Leadership is about bravery in the face of public ignorance. The Prime Minister might like to deny that he has used religion to incite fear in the community, but he has certainly used race to do so. Shamelessly demonise as murderers and rapists. Reject hate, also fear and suspicion.
You are a disgrace. And don't smile at me. Absolute disgrace. He has no right to spout that hatred, that racism, to be an apologist for terrorism, for murder, and feed hate, division and horror. We know where this leads, because we've seen it. We saw it on the 15th of March in New Zealand. He must be suspended. He does not deserve, he is not fit, he's not fit, he is not us.
In the rise of the politics of division, hate speech, race baiting, on the role that the media has also played in this country.
Now, it's quite clear from Senator Anning's statements from his first speech where he talked about the final solution in here. A policy advisor said to him, and these are Senator Anning's own words, that he needed something. He needed something that disgusting and that shocking to actually get his speech covered. Outrage, shock. Senator Lambie, she's one of the first people in this place to race bait, to talk about banning burqas and Muslim immigration. It's about getting a headline, personal gain, about politics, the hate media. Black and white have traded on dog whistling. How do these Murdoch mouthpieces operate so effectively in this country? Race baiting, hate speech, the grooming and radicalisation of an Australian man, a white terrorist. Hate media. This man was groomed and he was radicalised. Race bait.
Alrighty, so who didn't they manage to have a go at in there? You may not have heard a couple of the bits that I mentioned in the chat that they do, but yeah, they have a go at him for objecting to late-term abortion. They bring up, more than one of them bring up the whole NRA thing with One Nation. More than one of them say they need to use their power to prevent people like us from speaking. If you watch the people who watched it yesterday will have seen they want to be able to stop some people from representing us. It's yeah, looking problematic. But anyway, let's have a look at these speeches that I think are actually worth having a bit of a listen to. The news didn't cut these little bits in.
Now, I'm going to put the motion moved by Senators Cormann and Wong. I did have a request from a senator, Senator Bernardi, who's not in the chamber, to put Clause D separately. I'll look to the clerk to see what I should do, given I've had the request but the senator's not present. Look, in deference, I'll put the request separately. I have let Senator Bernardi know this is going to a vote now. So the question is that the motion moved by Senators Cormann and Wong, notice of motion number 2. Here is Senator Bernardi. Paragraphs A, B and C to be put in accordance with your request for D to be put separately. He's acknowledged that. So paragraphs A, B and C of notice of motion 2 in the name of Senators Cormann and Wong. The question is that they be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. The ayes have it. Now I put paragraph D of that motion. The question is that that paragraph be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. The ayes have it. We'll now move. Senator Wong.
I think it might be a good thing for the record to note that no senator voted against the operative censure provision in that motion.
Yep, I heard no voice against Clause D. Senator Bernardi.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I record for the record that I was opposed to A, B and C on that.
So recorded.
For the record, I think it should be noted that One Nation abstained from that vote.
I welcome this censure motion and I'll be supporting it. I want to note that I disagree with some of the additional words put by Senator Wong, where she said that free speech does not include hate speech, and she said that Senator Anning's comments were not part of the contest of ideas. Unfortunately, that's not true. We need to look at the polls. We are all failing to convince our fellow Australians about the importance and the rightness of non-discriminatory immigration. We can all here, other than Senator Anning, perhaps talk about how vile those comments were, and they were vile, and we can all talk about how non-discriminatory immigration is so important. But that is not a view held by so many, probably millions of Australians. We need to convince them, not by deplatforming people like Senator Anning, but by convincing people that he's wrong and that they're wrong and that they should think a different way. I find it amazing that we think we can solve our problem just by saying that Senator Anning shouldn't be allowed to have said what he said. The problem will remain. Now, Senator Anning has free speech. I think he should have been free to say what he said. As it happens, we all have free speech and we can all strongly disagree in the strongest possible terms with what he said, and that is why I will be joining you all in voting for this censure motion.
Senator Bernardi.
Mr. President, words matter, not only the specific words that are used, but the timing and the tone in which they are delivered. And let me start by the outset by saying I do believe that Senator Anning's comments in relation to the Christchurch massacre were imprudent, they were impolitic, they were flat out wrong to blame the victims. But I lament, I have to say, the political opportunism that was associated with them, and also with the opponents of Senator Anning. And rarely have I been as disappointed in that political opportunism as in the last fortnight. And it's on display here today, I regret. If this censure motion was confined to Part D, which is to disagree with and censure Senator Anning for the inflammatory comments, I would agree with it. But what I can't agree with is the adoption of this hypocritical language, this determination of hate speech that has been so widely bandied around. I'm disappointed in the government for adopting the language of the left, because according to those in this chamber, hate speech is whatever they want it to mean. It wasn't that long ago where, of course, the Australian newspaper was deemed to be the hate media and had no business in putting forward their own views of opposition or Labor government policy as it was at the time. We see that the Greens direct hate speech and accusations of hate speech to anyone that they basically disagree with. We know the Greens have targeted the Israeli Defence Forces, for example, and the Jews. At least one Green senator, if not others, have accused Israel of ethnic cleansing. Is that hate speech? They've referred to the Israeli nation as an apartheid nation. They support the boycott, divestment, sanctions regime. Is that hate speech? Senator Faruqi and a New South Wales Labor MP attended a rally protesting the recognition of Israel, where the senator said Israel was a settler colonial apartheid state. The rally itself chanted intifada, intifada. Was that hate speech? An intifada is an uprising against a sovereign nation. One placard at the rally depicted Jews as pigs and monkeys, stalked by a Palestinian lion targeting them. Was that hate speech? A young child was photographed at another rally, holding up a "Behead those who insult Islam" placard. Was that hate speech by the mother who allowed the child to happen? Where were the pious and sanctimonious, the outraged about that? They only cheer on the tribe. They will not examine their own conscience. I note that Senator Hanson-Young, of course a regular tweeter about hate speech, she'd have Peter Dutton locked up in the green gulag because he, in her word, attacked Alan Joyce because he was gay, apparently, which she labelled as vile homophobia. Under this new regime of hate speech, where it's determined by whom you're cheering on, Peter Dutton would be in the green gulag. And of course, you'd find people like Miranda Devine, journalists, who call out the inhumane refugee policy pursued by Labor and the Greens. She'd be locked up as a hater as well, because Senator Hanson-Young has accused her of hate speech as well. A rabid right-wing cheerleader, in the words of the Greens senator. Of course, I've regularly been accused of hate speech. Once again, back in 2015, a tweet saying, "Will Tony Abbott let hate speech from Cory Bernardi dictate Australia's refugee policy, or will he listen to the calls to show more heart?" So I'm in the green dystopian universe of haters simply for disagreeing with some policies that resulted in thousands of people dying at sea. Do you understand the can of worms that you are opening here? When you talk about people's language and you want to redefine something you disagree with as hate speech, whether it be reprehensible, whether it be vile, whether it be intemperate, or whether it be just flat out wrong, which I think Senator Anning's words were, it doesn't mean you should adopt this rhetoric and this mantra which is coming through here, because you will open up a process which is going to see us sink into an abyss, and not a decent abyss, because it is misused for political opportunistic chances. It is misused simply to score political points off and some bark off your opponents. We can keep going. We know that Sky Media, according to the Greens, are just the hate media. We know that this is Senator Hanson-Young again. This is the brutal reality check on the role of the right-wing media in promoting racism and broadcasting hate speech. Suddenly, Sky News is hate speech. And so will we be censoring that? Will we be having laws against that? Will you be trying to impose regulations on the broadcasting of ideas and facts that you disagree with, simply because you disagree with it? Senator Di Natale says if it's hate speech, yes. Well, the problem is, Senator Di Natale, Mr President, the problem for the Greens and Senator Di Natale is they make this stuff up as they go. They hold others to a higher standard than they expect to hold themselves. Sanctimonious hypocrisy is not unknown. It is not unknown in this place, and its major inhabitants are in that wedge of the Senate. They are seeking to wedge the Australian people. They are seeking to undermine some of the fundamental values and principles that we cherish and hold dear. Yes, you have the freedom of speech in this country, but you also have the freedom to condemn and criticise those you disagree with. Unfortunately, they only hold to one side of that equation, that they're allowed to beat up on whomever they disagree with. They will not be held to account for their own hatred, vile, misogynistic and racist outbursts. How else can you justify it? All around the world, the Green movement is saying any reference to skin colour is racist and vile, and we hear them say it here, except it's okay for them to chime in about grumpy old white men and terrible old white men. I mean, they're ageist, they're misogynist, they're misandrist. They pick up whatever they want to suit their agenda, and they're given a free pass on it all. And what I lament about this censure motion is not that it's inappropriate, it's just that the government and those who are meant to be sensible on the other side have adopted the language of the left. And what they are agreeing to today is to say that anything they disagree with, anything that is imprudent, impolitic, inappropriate, can be deemed as hate speech. The evidence is there. It is the defence of the weak to mask criticism and to label it as racist, hate speech, whatever it is, to suit the agenda. It is about shutting down an agenda. And so when you've got a senator referring to another senator as a creepy old white man, is that hate speech? When you've got senators referring to those who are worried about influences in our culture and our values, as labelling people as racists or hate speakers, where do we end up with this? Where do we end up with it? Why do we broaden what should be a very simple motion to say what Senator Anning said we believe is inappropriate? And I believe it's inappropriate. I think to blame the victims in the manner in which it had was absolutely wrong. It can never be justified. I believe the timing of it it undermined basic civility and basic humanity. It was political exploitation and opportunism at its very worst. But I also know there are many people who actually support what Senator Anning said. And that's the beauty of this country. We're allowed to disagree. We're allowed to disagree with people and to call it out. That is freedom of speech. And the great hypocrisy is that those who champion these freedoms and that champion this idea that somehow we can live in a paradise just by stifling and shutting down everyone else who we disagree with is going to lead to some utopia. It's not. It's not. We have an obligation to speak truth to power, and the power, unfortunately, unfortunately, rests with the hypocrisy of the Green movement and the left in this country. They are adopting language to make it mean things that it should never mean. They're doing
Senator
it
Bernardi,
as a means
time
of stifling our discussion.
I'm going around the chamber.
All right, so I've got Peter Giorgio reading the Pauline Hanson One Nation statement next, I believe. It's just a shame here this wasn't a stronger delivery, because it's actually, again, a really good speech. I could actually imagine Pauline's voice shaking a bit. She does tend to do that when she delivers things, if you've noticed. Although she delivers them, she says it, she gets it out there. But yeah, it's still, there's a lot of good in the Pauline Hanson statement, much as there was in the Bernardi statement, love him or hate him.
You're getting indications. I'll take all your names down. Senator Hinch. Senator Giorgio.
I rise to speak and put on the record, as Senator Hanson is unwell, I am making the following contribution to the debate on her behalf. I'd like to welcome to the Australian people the equivalent of a public flogging of an elected member in the Senate. Regardless of how many personal votes Fraser Anning may have received at the 2016 election, let me put it on record that he still drew a stronger vote than a number of you sitting in this chamber here today. Just ask Liberal Senator for Tasmania, Wendy Askew. Senator, you sit here today after receiving 0 votes from your Tasmanian constituents. In fact, Senator Askew joins us today as a result of the nepotism that runs deep through the Liberal Party. I've got no doubt your brother will be enjoying his plum job as Australia's Consul General in Chicago. Come to think of it, Fraser Anning polled a stronger number of votes than the Green Senator for New South Wales, Mehreen Faruqi, received 0 votes in the 2016 election from her New South Wales constituents. You, Senator Faruqi, are regarded as a token replacement for Senator Rhiannon. Not one of you received a single vote from the Australian public, but you line up in this chamber hungry for this public flogging of Senator Anning. Australians were horrified at the murder of 550 people in Christchurch on the 15th of March this year. And we were horrified to think that these murders were at the hands of an Australian. Many of us thought Australia had witnessed its last mass shooting after the Port Arthur massacre, which resulted in John Howard rightfully introducing a ban on semi-automatic weapons throughout this country in 1996. But here we are 23 years later, having to witness 50 innocent lives taken at the hands of a crazed lone gunman. Hate, extremism and violence has no place in our democratic, civilised nations. And I use this opportunity to reinstate One Nation's commitment to a peaceful rule of law for all, in accordance with our democratic constitution and acts of parliament. But while Senator Anning's comments following the mass killings in New Zealand were untimely and therefore deemed highly insensitive, he still maintains a right to his opinion. If One Nation endorses your actions to censor Senator Anning today, our freedom of speech as elected members of this chamber will be removed. Who will be the next member of parliament stopped from speaking their thoughts or their thoughts of the people they represent? We refuse to be led like sheep in this chamber, and therefore will abstain from voting on the essential motion. Our vote will not contribute to the demise of freedom of speech, nor will it endorse the timing or tone of the comments made by Senator Anning. The exploitation of these murdered in New Zealand is offensive, and each one of you should be ashamed on the manipulation of the events that day to suit your own agenda. The people of Queensland will judge Senator Anning at the ballot box, not us. Since the tragic event in New Zealand on March 15th, 65 additional terrorist attacks have been recorded across the globe. That's 418 people died as a result of terrorism over the last 18 days. Is this the future politicians in this chamber want for the people of Australia? With more than 600,000 people coming into this country every year for work, permanent residency and education purposes, we have left ourselves vulnerable to the same carnage that is on display in other parts of the world. Only days ago, Prime Minister Scott Morrison made the announcement that this government would give another $570 million in extra funding to Australia's counter-terrorism and counter-intelligence operations. This is an admission that Scott Morrison's government has failed to keep terrorists out of Australia. And let's not forget who opened the floodgates to the influx of these people coming to the country in the first place: the Labor Party. How many radical Islamic hate preachers have been allowed into Australia over the past decade, and yet complete silence from Labor and the Greens on the vile language that spews out of their mouths while they indoctrinate and radicalise vulnerable Australians? No, your political witch hunt in these dare question the immigration policy of this nation. The slightest whiff of protectionism in this country by the elites in this chamber, and it sends you into a psychological frenzy. Governments and elected members have three primary objectives: adhere to the Constitution, manage the economic stability of rule and law in our country, and lastly, stop telling people how to run their lives and businesses. Instead of getting on the crafting of robust economic narrative for Australia by drought-proofing our nation with visionary projects like the hybrid version of the Bradfield scheme, or establishing ways to bring back manufacturing, or cutting power prices with the construction of new coal-fired plants, they're all here beating your chests. We've treated the people of this country with the same despair and unworthiness that trust upon me and others who dare speak up to the forgotten voices of the nation. The Australian people have been treated like mushrooms, fed complete BS and kept in the dark. That is where One Nation steps in. We see the anguish, hurt and pain on their faces of ordinary Australians. We take the time to listen to the troubles and what they have to say. The people of Australia have watched you sell your souls and this country out so you can hold your seats in this chamber. What do you say to the generational farmers who have been forced off the land due to the pittance they are being paid for their produce and lack of water which governments have failed to provide? Your actions speak louder than words, because you've continued flogging our prime agricultural land off to the highest bidder overseas. It's not foreign investment, it's called foreign takeover. What do you say to the homeless who have once had no visual presence in our streets? Today, more than 100,000 Australians are homeless, yet you bellow from the rafters when we dare to call to redivert the $4.2 billion in foreign aid into helping our own people. You've left the support of our returned defence personnel to the will of God, instead of assisting them to address the mental and physical scars that our wars have caused them. What do you say to the aged pensioners who are stumbling around in the dark, too afraid to use electricity because they're struggling to make ends meet, without even turning on their air conditionings and heaters because they're too scared? Every day, today's central motion has nothing to do than a public flogging, and One Nation won't be part of it. Thank you.
I'll go to Senator Storr.
All right, we'll just remind you what the majority of the senators had to say. This is only 2 minutes long, sort of summarises it all quite well. And then we will let Fraser speak for himself, I guess. I don't really have a whole lot to add to some of this. I hope I've picked out the right bits so you can see that this was actually wider than just censoring Fraser Anning. It included measures to prevent hate speech moving forward in the Parliament, as they said. To support it was going to support One Nation speech being cracked down on, and probably Bernardi and others as well. I guess that's why he didn't support A, B and C as well, as he said, because they didn't limit it to just censoring Senator Anning. So here we go.
Who's the last speaker? I have Senator Anning, then I'll come to you. That is still acceptable to you? Senator Storer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to speak in support of this censure motion. I was shocked and appalled by Senator Anning's disgraceful comments in the wake of the Christchurch tragedy. He is an embarrassment to our country and to this parliament. We must take this opportunity to rise as one and show that he does not speak for Australia, that he does not speak for this Senate. More broadly, it's time to draw a line in the sand. The Islamophobic race-baiting and dog-whistling engaged in by some politicians, commentators and media outlets must stop. There's one thing that Christchurch tragedy should teach us, it's that there are real-world consequences to this behaviour. It's time for those of us with megaphones, for those of us in positions of power and influence, to reflect deeply on the impact of their words. We must rise above the politics of religious and racial division and disunity. It has no place in a modern, tolerant, multicultural society. I stand here as a passionate supporter of multicultural Australia. Our diversity and differences is what makes us strong and vibrant. It should be celebrated and embraced. Let us send a message to all those who wish to divide us, to tear us apart, that we are united, we are proud of our diversity, and we will fight like hell to defend it. Thank you.
Well, Senator Anning, would you like to speak now?
Thanks.
I'm going to give Senator Anning the opportunity to speak. He's been quite patient. Senator Whish-Wilson, unless you're raising a point of order. Yep.
Heard you said Senator Storer was the last speaker. I wasn't aware there was a speaker's list.
Had indicated they wished to speak.
Okay, Senator Hanson, I'd like to make a short contribution as well.
Senator Anning.
Thank you, Mr. President. This censure motion against me is a blatant attack on free speech. It is also an exercise in left-wing virtue signalling of the worst kind. Of course, this is exactly the kind of self-righteous left-wing intolerance of alternative views that you would expect from an extremist party like the Greens, Mr. President. What is shocking is that it is supposedly Liberal Prime Minister who is leading the charge, joining hands with Labor and the Greens. The specific reasons for moving a motion to censure me are barely coherent. The motion calls on the Senate to censure me for supposedly inflammatory and divisive comments, seeking to attribute blame to the victims of a horrific crime. What inflammatory and divisive comments, Mr. President? What blame did I attribute to the victims? I said nothing of the sort. Following this shocking attack on two mosques in Christchurch on the 15th of March, I issued a media statement condemning the shooting and the shooter in the strongest possible terms. However, after putting the immediate blame where it belonged, I looked for contributing causes. I identified that immigration program that allowed Muslim fanatics to migrate to New Zealand was a key enabler of community violence. The claim that this somehow blames the victims is absurd, Mr. President. My real crime, of course, is that I simply told the truth at a time when the left-wing political and media elites least wanted to hear it. In the 3 weeks before the shooting in Christchurch, 120 Christians in Nigeria were shot or hacked to death by Muslims. The tragedy was not reported in a single Australian news outlet that I am aware of. Much closer to home, in the Philippines in January, a cathedral was bombed by Muslims and 20 innocents attending Mass were killed, with over 100 injured. Much closer, where was the statement from Morrison's government denouncing the killers? Where was the outrage from the others condemning me? Just 3 days after the Christchurch killings, a Muslim fanatic killed 3 and wounded 5 others in a tram in Holland. Again, silence from those seeking to censure me now. Since the attack in Christchurch on the 15th of May, there have been 66 new terrorist attacks committed worldwide by Muslims, killing 342 and injuring many hundreds of others. Since the Islamic attack on the Twin Towers in New York in September 11, 2001, there have been more than 34,000 terrorist attacks conducted in the name of Islam. This is a staggering number. Once again, we hear the deafening silence from these figures, from those moving this censure motion, because, of course, Muslims as perpetrators does not fit their current narrative. Where was the Parliament's condolence motion for these victims of Muslim terrorism? Yesterday, the government expressed solidarity with Muslim victims of one New Zealand attack, but the growing list of thousands of civilian victims of Muslim terrorism is ignored. Has everyone forgotten the scores of heinous terrorist attacks committed by Muslim fanatics here in Australia, in France, Germany, Britain, Spain and the United States and elsewhere? Australians and New Zealanders should be able to both condemn the attacks in Christchurch, but also to see them in perspective and be able to discuss related factors without being shouted down or subject to parliamentary censure. Following my comments on the Christchurch shooting, I was the victim of a physical attack in Melbourne. Even though this only involved a young adult with an egg, it was nevertheless an example of political motivated violence. While those who don't like me may have been delighted to see me attacked, we might have expected a statesman-like response by the Prime Minister deploring such action. Not at all. The President insisted, Prime Minister Morrison said that I should be charged. He was reported saying that having been a victim of politically motivated violence, I should, and I quote, be subject to the full force of the law. Yesterday I asked Minister Birmingham if the government backed the Prime Minister's shocking statement that I have no place in Parliament, and his apparent lack of concern for politically motivated violence against me. The answer was a resounding yes. It may have only been an idiot with an egg this time, but there is a continuum which begins with this and ends with a fanatic with a gun or a bomb. But apparently, according to Prime Minister Morrison, that's okay as long as the victims are Conservatives. The Prime Minister loves to recycle his predecessor's mantra that Australia is the most successful multicultural society in the world. What a ridiculous statement. By what criteria is this conclusion arrived at, Mr. President? It is an established fact that diversity undermines cohesion, increases alienation and is a key driver of increasing crime. It is also an established fact that if you import those who despise our values and beliefs and whose religion enjoins them to violence, then this sort of diversity leads to increasing violence and terrorism. This censure motion against me is an attempt to deflect attention from the government and the opposition's bipartisan commitment to reckless, indiscriminate immigration, a failed policy which is importing Muslims and Sudanese wholesale, despite the proven track records of both groups in causing crime and terrorism. In response to the Christchurch attack, the extreme left, exemplified by the Greens, has seized on an opportunity to try and smear everyone right of centre as potentially violent racists. However, what is truly shocking is that the Prime Minister, Mr Morrison, seems to have bought into that as well. Advocating politically or religiously motivated violence is an indicator of extremism, Mr President, not the quiet, reasonable, peaceful advocacy for a change in our immigration program before European Australians become a minority in our own country. Now innocent Conservatives and even the Ramsay Centre for Western Civilisation are being accused of guilt for mass murder on the flimsy basis that the killer's manifesto opposing Islamic immigration to Europe. To blame Conservatives for Christchurch is as irrational as blaming Socialist Democrats for communist mass murder. Apparent government sanctions to this left-wing exploitation of the Christchurch killing has abruptly tilted the Australian political landscape to the far left. It has created an atmosphere of fear and suspicion of anyone who dissents from politically correct left-wing orthodoxy. The idea that anyone with right-wing views might somehow be likely to undertake a similar attack to the deranged psychopath in New Zealand is just absurd. It's sinister and Orwellian. That a supposedly Liberal Prime Minister would buy into this extreme left-inspired witch hunt is frankly shocking and just shows how far to the left the Liberal Party has gone. However, what fair-minded Australian will find most offensive about Prime Minister Morrison's response to my comments and to his government's support of this censure motion is not simply the left-wing self-righteousness, but the gross hypocrisy. This year, the Morrison government is giving $43 million in aid to the Palestinian territories and another $50 million in aid to Pakistan, despite the fact that the Muslim government of both countries sponsors terrorist attacks on their neighbours. His government is giving nearly $100 million in Australian taxpayers' dollars to Muslim countries whose governments are killing innocent Israelis and Indians, and he has the nerve to condemn me. This censure motion against me is actually a reflection of the creeping neo-socialism that is gradually eliminating freedom of conscience in Australia. This government refused to replace Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act, refusing to rein in the commissars of the Human Rights Commission, and now, along with Labor and the Greens, seeks to condemn someone by simply speaking the truth to power, saying that free speech is conditional on staying within the bounds that those in power stipulate, as Minister Birmingham said yesterday, is actually to say that there is no free speech at all. What is being censured here is not really me. It is the right of anyone to say something that those in power disagree with. If, as a senator, I am not allowed to express my views, what chance do everyday Australians have to say what they think? This left-wing virtue signalling censure motion is also a metaphor for everything that is wrong with this government. Sir Robert Menzies would be rolling in his grave. Thank you.
Okay, well, it's pretty self-explanatory. What they've done isn't just to censor Anning. They're still riding on this thing that's happened in Christchurch as an excuse to ram through a whole lot of hate speech laws. And we were watching them discuss little bits about the national firearms thing and changes to Section 44 and all sorts of things yesterday. So I think we're going to find, no matter, especially if Labor get through, but even if Libs get through, we're going to find ourselves in a whole lot of trouble after the election if we can't get some real representation in for us. That's just my opinion, but anyway, that's all I have for us today, guys. I hope you got something out of this, and thanks for listening.
Hate, division and horror. We know where this leads, because we've seen it. We saw it on the 15th of March in New Zealand. He must be suspended. He does not deserve, he is not fit, he